Okay. I'm going to assume the mic is working well because nobody complained about it last time. So that's going to have to be sufficient. I have some time, so I'm going to read chapter 3 of the book Sectarianization. Chapter 3 is the Arab region at a tipping point. Why sectarianism fails to explain the turmoil. The dramatic seizure in June 2014, let me just make sure this is, yeah, it's good. The dramatic seizure in June 2014 of the northern Iraqi city of Mosul by the coalition of Sunni Arab militias spearheaded by the Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham, ISIS, marks what may be a fateful turning point in Iraq's history. Many have gone further, arguing that the entire system of nation states designed in 1916, when the British diplomat Mark Sykes and his French counterpart Francois Georges, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Picot, the famous, everybody is aware of, well, not everybody, most people in the Middle East are aware of that plan, secretly planned the eventual fate of the Arab provinces of the Ottoman Empire in the aftermath of World War I is now being erased. This view is understandable and has been shaped by the turmoil that has engulfed the Arab world. Libya has slipped into civil war, in 2014, and faces the specter of the partition, as do Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. In parallel, the declaration of ISIS's caliphate in Iraq and part of Syria is prompting jihadists in other countries to envisage copycat emirates of their own. Egypt, the largest Arab state in terms of population, is not at risk of civil war or of partition, but is on the path to social disaster. The combination of massive aid from the GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council, and high levels of domestic coercion has staved this off temporarily, but is already proving inadequate to deal with the country's fundamental economic problems and deep political malaise. If a social explosion occurs, it will be massively costly, if not impossible to contain. The challenge to regional states is, moreover, increasingly framed as a struggle between the Sunni and Shia branches of Islam, including in several Arab countries whose populations are almost exclusively Sunni. The narrative of sectarianism as the main driver of regional and domestic politics has gained ground since the US invasion of Iraq in 2003 and the subsequent establishment of majority rule there, regarded by many Iraqi Sunnis as a formula for Shia domination by the Syrian conflict since 2011, but the Syria conflict since 2011 has helped make it dominant. Both narratives of paradigmatic change are gripping, but they confuse appearances with causes. Certainly, many of the region states are experiencing deep structural crises, threatening societal cohesion and destabilizing internal political alignments. But framing this in terms of a sweeping challenge to the borders drawn by Sykes and Picot and of an overarching Sunni-Shia sectarian divide overstates the threat to existing nation states and oversimplifies the social dynamics behind emerging political challenges, offering a poor guide to appropriate policy responses. Okay. The Arab world's 20th century. The author continues, he claims not all Arab countries are at risk, but taken as a whole, the Arab region is at the onset of a period similar to that of a tumultuous quarter of a century, after the end of World War II, in which newly independent Arab states took direct control over the populations, territory, natural resources, and government machinery, and learned how to conduct foreign affairs and national defense. Now as then, there are challenges to the legitimacy of state borders and domestic power structures, shifting regional alignments and cross-border threats, and political upheavals reflecting long-term socioeconomic transformations. In the 1950s, these dynamics led to the Arab, quote, Cold War, which ended only after the resolution of Yemen's civil war in the mid-1960s and the disastrous 1967 war with Israel ushered in lasting reconciliation between Egypt and Saudi Arabia. The role of multilateral institutions, especially the League of Arab States and the UN, in resolving disputes or managing crisis was weak and ineffective then and is now. Yeah. And once again, former global hegemons, Great Britain and France in the 1950s and USA today being 10 years ago, when the book was written, roughly speaking, are in full or partial retreat, loosening constraints on local actors and altering their perceptions of threat and opportunity. But history is not repeating itself. The end of the British and French Empire, highlighted in the Middle East. Hi, Coping. Yes, I am live now. I had some time. I don't know what time it is by you. I can't remember what time zone you're in. And hopefully it's not too late. And hopefully you got some sleep. I'm just getting on to chapter 3. Okay, so where was I? History is not repeating itself, says the author. The end of the British and French Empire, highlighted in the Middle East by the failed intervention of the Suez Canal in 1956, was followed by the polarizing yet stabilizing superpower rivalry between the USA and the Soviet Union. That is not the case now. The NATO action in Libya in 2011 was a high point, and sounds good. Okay. Well, it's good to see you. The NATO action in Libya in 2011 was a high point, but the response of the USA and the European unions to events in the region since then has been feeble to the point of disinterest. The quote, planned mass killing of demonstrators in Egypt in August 2013, as Human Rights Watch called it, Libya's ongoing implosion since 2014, the massive death and destruction inflicted by Israel on Gaza's population in July-August 2014, and even the advancement of ISIS in Iraq since 2014. Arab responses to geopolitical flux and transition also differ in critically important ways. Newly independent states after 1945 were inexperienced and vulnerable. Most of North Africa, the Gulf littoral states, and Sudan did not even gain independence before 1951 to 1971 and were underdeveloped administratively and politically. But now most are overdeveloped, quote, fierce, as political scientist Nazi Ayubi labeled them, with massive bureaucracies and security services and decades of experience in monitoring populations and protecting borders and ruling regimes. However, quote, hardening has not made most Arab states noticeably more efficient in providing basic needs and public goods and services. This is true, and certainly not more equitable in doing so, also likely true. And it has not made them more tolerant of religious, confessional, ethnic, or regional diversities of their populations, or more merciful generally. To the contrary, Arab states are probably less amenable now than they are in their formative years to pressures for needed political change, and less willing or able to introduce reforms allowing crucial improvements to economic performance and social equity. I think this is why the last year in Syria has been so interesting to watch as they develop post-Assad. Because I think, at least personally, I think they're one of the first Arab states to really, really work hard at development in these areas. And well, it's a bit too soon to say with Iran, obviously. I don't have a crystal ball, but if Khomeini's regime falls, which is possible, given that sort of death blow they were given by Israel earlier this year, and the protests now, it's, if we see a new Iran, that'll be an entirely different world. So who knows? Like completely unprecedented. So that would be interesting. I'm still holding out for like road trips across the Middle East. So we'll see. Where was I? This sets most Arab states on a downhill path. Economic inequality and rudimentary social welfare systems in the independence period led to political unrest and ultimately to actual or attempted regime change in most Arab countries. But the gap between the rich and the poor has never been as wide or as apparent as it is now. No less seriously, the populations of Arab states then were far smaller and largely rural, allowing food subsistence at affordable cost for the vast majority. But populations now are several times larger, with greater numbers at or below the poverty line, and overwhelmingly urban, leaving them dependent on food imports and subsidies. It's actually very interesting, the fact that it's become more difficult to feed populations as they've become larger and more urban. It makes sense that rural populations could feed themselves. Cheers. I have a tea. The economic failures of a growing number of Arab states, including oil exporters such as Iraq and Libya, is particularly significant against this backdrop. It moreover explains why the most powerful ideological discourse of the independence period, Arab nationalism, was adopted by certain, quote, popular classes, but remained heavily the product and domain of elites and intelligentsia. Whereas today's Salafism, in parentheses, and its Shia equivalent, is taking hold predominantly among the massive and growing underclass. Really? For some, hold on, let me just look something here. Okay, according to this, and this is just a dictionary, so take it for what you will. Salafism, a member of a strictly Orthodox Sunni Muslim sect advocating a return to the early Islam of the Quran and the Sunnah. For some, the trend reveals the power of sectarianism. Coping, it was saying, sure, let me go back here for a second. To a large degree, this reflects social changes. Arab nationalism was adopted by certain, quote, popular classes, but remained heavily the product of domain of elites and intelligentsia, whereas today's Salafism and its Shia equivalent is taking hold predominantly among the massive and growing underclass. It's actually saying both. It's saying that Salafism on the Shia end, and it's also saying the Shia equivalent, which I actually don't know what that is what had become or was becoming the largest underclass, and that Arab nationalism was more so in the upper class and elites. By the way, I can't confirm or deny any of these claims that the author is making. I don't know. So I'm just reading this for the first time, and I don't have the personal experience or knowledge to confirm or deny. For some, the trend reveals the power of sectarianism, but in reality, it reflects the degradation and mutation of structures of political and social power and economic wealth in the decades since the Arab state system stabilized in the early 1970s. Oh my goodness, the cat lady's here. Hi, dear. How are you? Oh my gosh. I'm so happy to have you here. What an honor. Thank you. I'm reading a book about sectarianism, and I'm on chapter 3. I'm just trying to understand my world a little better. It's particularly relevant, I think, to the Middle East right now, and I figured I would read it publicly because it's probably a book that at least a handful of people would be interested in. So why not? First live, not the first one, just the first one you noticed, but to be honest, it's been really sporadic in the last forever. So hopefully a little bit more frequent going forward. You'll probably see me a little bit more. I really have not been active online much in the last very long time. Okay. For some, the trend reveals the power of sectarianism, but in reality, it reflects the degradation and mutation of structures of political and social power and economic wealth in the decades since the Arab state system stabilized in the 1970s, so something like that. The failure to evolve in ways that were responsive to social change and democratic and economic restructuring has left most Arab states, if not all of them, struggling to meet the complex challenges of today's world. There's no external power that has the capability to provide assistance or engage in intervention on the scope and scale needed to fix their problems. I don't know why the assumption would be somebody outside would have to fix the problems. Don't we all try to fix our own problems? Indeed, it is no longer even certain that the Arab region is important enough to generate such an interest. Oh dear. Barack Obama's foreign policy desired to pivot to, well, Barack Obama did nothing good for the Middle East. He came and bombed a bunch of stuff and left us all with a mess that we're dealing with today. Literally today, we're dealing with Barack Obama's messes, multiple messes. So thanks, Obama. Barack Obama's foreign policy desired to, quote, pivot to Asia, moving away from the complicated politics of the Middle East confirms this development. More recently, very nice to see you too. More recently, where was I? Obama has compared the region to a scene from the 2008 Batman movie, The Dark Knight. What the heck? Suggesting that the Middle East is similar to Gotham City, controlled by thugs, and where ISIS plays the role of the Joker who sets the city on fire. What is this nonsense? Okay. This analogy is widely interpreted as suggesting that the problems of the region cannot be fixed by outside powers, that any deeper involvement is ill-advised. It's really rich of him to come in, mess stuff up, and then say that. That's really, anyway. I have personal feelings about this, apparently. A view that is, okay, cannot be fixed by outside powers. Any deeper involvement is ill-advised. A view that is widely popular in the USA, including among key sections of the foreign policy establishment. Okay, so that was that. Explaining the chaos. Okay, let's see if we can try. In the first instance, I'm trying to keep my throat okay because I just got over a pretty harsh cough. In the first instance, far from being general, the challenge to existing states is very localized. The one serious challenge to the map drawn by Sykes and Picot. Coping, am I pronouncing Picot right? P-I-C-O-T, is it, am I supposed to pronounce the T at the end? Probably not, right? Anyway, the one serious challenge by the map drawn by them comes from the growing autonomy of the Kurds. Oh, okay, well, that's extremely relevant today. You have the PKK and the SDF in Syria today, clashing with the STG, which is the Syrian transitional government. So let's see what they have to say about the Kurds. Quite unfortunately, although that was probably a very inevitable situation, sadly. The development of the Kurdish regional government's army, the Peshmerga, into the strategic oil rich city of Kirkuk in northern Iraq on June 12, 2014, fulfills a long-standing objective and takes the Kurds closer to full independence. Whether or not this is reached anytime soon, it enhances the autonomy of Syria's Kurds. Although, spoiler alert, it hasn't. I can say that 11 years later. Although the differences in political agendas and social constituencies between the Kurdish Democratic Party of Iraq and the dominant Democratic Union Party of Syria may prevent unification of the Kurdish regions of both countries. In the meantime, the only border that appears to have been erased so far lies between eastern Syria and western Iraq. Yes, the T is the norm. Not sure if that alters it. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. Picot. Sykes-Picot. That's what coping is referring to. How to pronounce it. Okay. Thank you. In the meantime, the only border that appears to have been erased so far lies between eastern Syria and western Iraq, where local Arab clans, traders, and smokers. Kitty, what are you doing? Okay. Just heard a loud noise. And armed groups have moved in both directions for years. But even here, political and social dynamics in eastern Syria are not wholly interchangeable with those of western Iraq, and few fight in each other's wars despite the emergence of a swath of Salafi and jihadist militancy. Clans on the Syrian side of the border, for example, align mainly with the Assad regime or with rebel groups. No, I don't know what he was doing. I hear no, no, I have a friend who taught their cat how to do that. He knows how to do, I don't know what he's in the kitchen. I don't know what he's doing, but he's making news. He's quite curious. about everything and loves knocking things over like cats do. Right, Kitty? Hi. Here you are. Hi. You can make an appearance? Okay. Just don't stand on the keyboard, please, okay? Plans, you're gonna go behind the computer. All right. No, you cannot knock the picture down. That's not on the agenda. Please don't knock the tea down either. No. Okay. Thank you. I don't know who you are, Kale, but that's a really strange, bizarre, and inappropriate question. So if you keep asking those, I'll just block you. Okay. Let's see. Clans on the Syrian side of the border, for example, align mainly with the Assad regime and or with rebel groups, including Al-Qaeda's affiliate, Jabhat al-Nusra, whose struggle for power focuses entirely on Syria. Correct. Even when clans declare allegiance to ISIS, they do so to counter their local rivals. Their material interests and long-term political calculations still center on relations with provincial capitalists and with Damascus. Okay. On the other side of the border, the insurgent Iraqi clans and other militias similarly have their sights set firmly on relations with the national capital, Baghdad. Iraq may suffer the de facto partition between Sunni and Shia regions as the outcome of the current fighting, but this is unlikely to be stable or lasting. Significant political parties and religious leaders in both communities still insist on coexistence and integration. Okay, we're talking about Iraq now. While those who seek regional autonomy need to win a share of key assets, the capital and oil, and therefore will be compelled to reach mutual acceptable compromises with other communities. And therein lies the challenges. And despite frequent dire predictions, the Syrian conflict is unlikely to end in formal partition. Spoiler alert, it hasn't. Well, we'll see. It's still in development, but I don't think it will shake out that way. I think the STG will end up running the entire country ultimately. Even if societal reconciliation and national reconstruction proves painfully difficult and slow. In contrast to the Sunni Arab inhabitants of Mosul, for example, who have always looked to Aleppo in Syria and southeast Turkey for their sociocultural and economic ties, and may now prefer autonomy. Within a federal Iraqi state, their counterparts in Aleppo have never ceased to see themselves solely within the context of a unitary Syrian state. Like I said, we'll see what happens. Even ISIS, which operates as a truly cross-border movement, remains heavily focused on Iraq, where it first appeared. In Syria, it had been unable to hold on to any territory west of Aleppo, or to put down genuine roots in areas it controls in the eastern provinces of Raqqa, Deir ez-Zor, and Al-Hasaka. If this has changed in the last 10 years, it's possible, I'm not sure. As far as I'm aware, they're mostly in the northeast now of Syria. And yeah. That's all I have to say about that for now. It has no presence in Lebanon and Jordan so far, talking about ISIS, and little prospect of gaining a significant local constituency in either country. This is partly due to the social and sectarian composition of Lebanon and the strength of state institutions in Jordan. But it also reflects the reaction of local populations to the specter of violence next door and to the massive influx of Iraqi and Syrian refugees over the past decade. Second, the challenge to the existing system comes not from Sunni Shia sectarianism, but from three processes that have driven it over the past 2 decades or more. First is the decline of the state provision of critical public services, such as health and education, and other forms of social welfare and safety nets, amidst distorted forms of economic liberalization, unaccompanied by parallel political, quote, decompression. First is saying let's jump to the. Okay, so they're saying the challenge is not because of Sunni Shia sectarianism, but from three processes that have driven it in the last 2 decades. First is decline of state provision of critical. Okay, so that just states are providing less public services, such as health and education, other forms of welfare, safety nets. Okay, so he's saying sectarianism is not religious, but it's because Arab states have been allegedly doing a worse job of simply providing for their people. That's the claim. Amidst distorted forms of economic liberalization, accompanied by parallel political decompression. I don't know what that actually means. Second, predatory privatization in the decade prior to the start of the Arab Spring widened economic disparities to levels that were unprecedented as recently as mid-1990s, right? That makes sense, leaving 20 to 40% of the population in many Arab countries at or below the poverty line, measured as per capita income of $2 a day. So obviously that's very low. And the impact of these processes has cut across sectarian or ethnic lines in many cases. It is where they have converged with state policies that privilege certain communities or marginalize others, whether in terms of political access, social welfare, or economic opportunity, that have generated anti-systemic counterforces. On one hand, this explains why communities that experience worse poverty rates may not turn to militancy, whereas less afflicted ones do. This explains why communities that experience worse poverty rates may not. Some southern Jordanian cities up to 4 times the proportion of people in poverty than the average in a greater Amman area, for example, but are cushioned by the assurances of job security in the public sector. So the jihadists who call for the overthrow of governing domestic and regional order tend to come from the low-income neighborhoods of Amman, Zarqa, rather than impoverished Marfaq, Ma'an, and Tafila. Oh. He's basically tying the radicalization to economics, not in a super clear way, to be honest. Like he's saying that the ones who are more poor don't become as extreme as the ones who are. Yes, you're welcome to suggest something, go big. You're more than welcome. On the other hand, conversely, the deliberate securitization of the Baghdad government's relations with the predominantly Sunni provinces of Western Iraq under Maliki, which he employed as a means of concentrating his power and compelling his Shia rivals to stand behind his bid for a second and third term for office, has revived and fueled Shia insurgency. Similarly, long-standing government's neglect of inner city neighborhoods in the Lebanese cities of Tripoli and Sudan has produced Sunni militancy, just as has in the large poverty belts around Syrian cities since 2011. From what I can tell, what he's largely saying is that radicalization has more to do with, not radicalization, sectarianization. It's different. It's not the same thing as radicalization. So I should use the terminology that applies. He's saying that sectarianization has much more to do with economy than anything else. And he's giving examples, but it's sort of confusing over just the categories. I mean, I get his basic point. It's just the way he's laying it out and his examples are a little confusing to me at the moment. Let me go back a little, and then I'm actually right at the conclusion. So, made sense so far. So at least until this point, so that's good. He'll probably, let's see how he ties it together in his conclusion. And then if I feel like it, I'll come back. But the gist is he's saying it's not, he's saying it's not the Sunni Shia divide. He's saying it's economics. Yeah, many different forms of radicalization, apparently. And sectarianization is not, it's more about what's the word I'm looking for? Tribalism and so on. Okay. So the conclusion. Sectarianism has arguably become more than a mere consequence of these processes, but its greatest potency still comes from the convergence of the above three processes. The fragility of the Levant's nation states and porosity of their borders is being brought into sharp focus. This has generated debates where some have suggested that the Sykes-Picot borders are no longer tenable and should be redrawn to accommodate the alleged wishes of sectarian and ethnic groups. Doing so, it is suggested will both undo historical injustice and enhance regional stability. Okay, I completely disagree with that sentence, that last statement that he made. That's a neutral starting point, but who's providing the economic alternative? Well, like many problems, people are often good at pointing out the problem. The solution is a little bit harder. So as of chapter 3, he has not yet proposed a solution. We'll see if he gets to one later. Although you do see, you know, just looking at the news today in the Middle East, today, I mean this week, this month, you can see Israel signed a huge gas deal with Egypt for $23 billion. Don't quote me on that. Jordan just signed a gas deal with Syria. Syria is doing all sorts of preliminary deals around with other nations to rebuild. So I think the solution is just literally infrastructure, being wise about economy. It's not that complicated, but it's hard. It's just a matter of priorities and will. You have to have the right priorities. And if the people are not a priority, then, and there's no will, then Countries are just not going to do it. But if there is a will, then there actually is a way. So, okay. I mean, technically, like you see this in Israel, the economy is pretty okay here. There's a will for it, and there's like a very strong will for it. So agriculture is developed, water systems, tech, even arts. So you have to want to do it. Okay. And obviously the government has to be cooperative. Okay, so here he says, okay, so he just made the suggestion that possibly undoing the Sykes-Picot borders would undo historical injustice and enhance regional stability. I think that's respectfully crazy. I think that would, that makes no sense. I mean, they're there now. They didn't make sense to begin with, but they are there now. And just taking them apart just because, just to say you're undoing injustice, probably will actually make things way worse. If there's a specific border that needs to be contested or taken or reconsidered, then obviously that's one thing, but to just take them all off makes no sense. There's actually, I mean, there's a number of borders in dispute now as we speak. So, and there's various ways of dealing with those conversations, from literal conversations to bombs and killing people. And both of those are happening now in terms of figuring out those borders. So I prefer conversation, but you know, it is what it is. Right. Simple doesn't mean easy. Exactly. This is a fundamental misreading of the roots of the turmoil in the contemporary Arab world, says the author. The real threat to the Sykes-Picot system comes not from where the borders are located, but what has been happening in recent decades within these borders. Those who insist on reframing the region's societies and politics as governed by sect and ethnicity miss this important point. This prompts them to seek or endorse new political arrangements that, by ignoring socioeconomic realities, are equally flawed and likely to be at least as unstable. Okay, I think this is a both and situation. So the author is making the argument that rather than, because we're talking about sectarianism, and he's trying to get to the root of why sectarianism exists. And I'll make the claim that it exists because it is an excellent political tool. Leaders of nations, media apparatuses, religious leaders, rabble rousers, all sorts of people employ the use of sectarianism and use it and light a match to manipulate different populations into different beliefs, all sorts of things, because it's a useful tool. It's useful for manufacturing consent. I don't think it's a ethical tool, but that doesn't stop anybody from using it. So why does sectarianism exist? Because it's possible and people can use it. The question is, what would prevent people from using it? And I do think that his argument of, he's saying he thinks the root is more socioeconomic problems. So I mean, if some people, not all, some people are going to have an issue no matter what, whether they're wealthy or poor, they're going to have an issue with other people. But there is a huge portion of populations who, if their governments actually fostered a healthy economy in their region, then they would be less prone to fall for sectarianism. But if their governments still insisted, regardless, if their governments insist on using the sectarian rhetoric, that's always a risk. I mean, this is literally, I mean, this is streaming on Twitter, right? So anyone who's on Twitter who's paying any attention to politics in the Middle East can see all the sectarian overtones in the conversations being had. Yeah. Okay. It really also depends on the region. Let's see what Copeland has to say. Regardless of justice, is Syria a better idea than Palestine or Somalia? Tool leads to morale. Don't like. Okay, give me a better tool. They're out of tools. Moral, not moral. I mean, each of these countries and regions, you're saying, is Syria better than idea than Palestine or Somalia? They each bring something unique to the table, whether it's geographically, like the literal land, the resources, lack of resources, the people. People are not the same. So I wouldn't say one is better than the other. They're just different. If I was sitting here next to my sister, you'd say, who's better? Well, we're just different. I mean, you could argue that I'm better at something than she is and vice versa. We're just getting into technicalities there. So I look, I'm not a fan of this whole unipolar world. I think that nation states should be ethno-nationalist. They should be patriotic. They should be proud of their heritage. Whether it's a singular heritage to a country or multiple heritages to a country, I think there is value in that. It's value in culture and tradition. So the answer to sectarianism isn't erase the past, erase heritage, erase culture. Be proud of it, but that's different than using it as a tool of division and separation or supremacy, for example. No, that's okay, Coping. Somaliland is interesting. I'm not going to say much about that because I literally did not hear about it until a couple months ago at best. So I probably don't have anything to say that's accurate or coherent. Okay. I think the question that's on my mind is more so what could motivate the leaders of countries to stop employing sectarianism as a tool, and not just leaders, public figures. I mean, even if you look at American media, public figures also employ sectarianism in their region. So the rhetoric, if you're talking left and right, it's all the same thing. So yeah, that's what I would be more curious about, is how do you incentivize regions to not lean on those tools? And they're technically weapons. Sectarianism is technically a weapon. Like blaming an entire population could just decide to be hateful. This is possible, of course. But at least from my observation, it does seem like, my minor observation in the last 5 years in the Middle East is it seems like it's mainly outside parties, not outside, internal parties, but internal individuals, figures, groups who are inciting populations like every population has 1 to 5% of extremists, potential rabble rousers, and so on. And they are either active or neutral or subdued. And so the question is, are you trying to activate those? Don't try to activate them. So what I've seen a lot in the Middle East is many parties trying to activate those extremist elements. And then once the extremist elements in whatever population are activated, you can create the illusion of the entire population being activated, especially if you have a violent event that occurs or a highly emotional event occurs, and then you can activate the entire population. So it's a mess. Okay. Sectarianism, it's essentially tribalism in your opinion, not restricted to bloodline, clan, etc., but just as much, arguably more convictions. Yeah, I would agree with you on that. Okay, so let's see what his final claim is. This process political arrangements by ignoring socioeconomic realities equal flawed and likely to be. Okay, so he's still saying he thinks it's economics. It's a fair argument that causes sectarianism. That's at the root of sectarianism. The internal, regional, or communal borders of states such as Iraq, Syria, and Libya may one day be drawn, and this might contribute to political stability, but focusing on external borders and the lines on the map as the source of the problem while ignoring the internal character and policies of post-colonial Arab states is analytically distorting, and implementing this as official policy will only perpetuate and deepen the broken politics of the Arab Islamic world. Yes, exactly. Changing the borders will not solve the problem. There's a few exceptions to that rule, obviously. Borders do change over time for reasons. But if we're talking about the larger issue of sectarianism, no, it's not likely to solve the problem. Okay, that was very interesting. That was chapter 3. Where he largely makes it the claim that Arab states could do better, that people were fed better 20 years ago because they lived in more rural communities and there were smaller populations. There's much larger populations now in urban areas. So he's saying that has contributed to feeding sectarianism. The leadership has not made those economic improvements necessarily a priority, and that he floats the idea of just erasing the Sykes-Picot borders, and then he says, actually, it's a terrible idea. That won't solve the problem. You actually have to solve the grievances within a region to solve the problems, which that's true. Coping says borders change. Donbass as example, Kosovo, Judea, and Samaria. Yeah. I'm not opposed to changing borders, but I am opposed to them changing just willy-nilly. It has to be a good reason for it. It has to be actually very productive. Or it has to be a case of conquering, which is just might is right, you know. It is what it is. That's how it's been since the beginning of time. So, okay, so that's it. Chapter 4 is next. I'm not going to do that now. I'm just skimming it very quickly. Chapter 4 is a narrative identity approach to Islamic sectarianism. Okay, very interesting. All right, well, thank you. Anybody who's here, I hope you have a wonderful day, evening, afternoon, wherever you are. Coping, it's good to see you. What makes for a good reason? That's a good question. I'm sure there's some examples. I'm going to think on that. The cat lady, if you're still here, very good to see you, dear. I hope you're well. All right, everybody, take care. And stream.